His power over sickness and death, we're going to pick it up in Mark 5:21. I have the text all written out for you so you could follow right along and make notes if you want to. We have 8 outline points, and we'll go through each of those points, and then we'll have a summary and an application or a teaching towards the end. So let's pick it up in the first outline point or sub-point of this section is his dire or a dire request. When Yeshua had crossed over again, this is him crossing over the Sea of Galilee, in the boat to the other side, the west side, likely towards, like I said, Capernaum, where he did a lot of his ministry. A large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. He likely did what he did before. The crowd was so big that he just, pushed a boat. They pushed a boat a couple of, 10 or 12 feet out in the Sea of Galilee, and he sat on the boat, or he stood on the boat and taught the people as they stood around the seashore. It was easier for him to do that than have him crowded there. So anyway, that's what he did. He stayed by the seashore and he taught. In verse 22 says, one of the synagogue officials, this particular official, I believe, superintended the synagogue, so he was involved in ministry and involved in facilitating ministry at a synagogue. And his name was Jairus. It looks like Jairus. Actually, pronunciation would be Jairus. Jairus, since there's no pronunciation of J there. We're going to just say Jairus for convenience sake anyway, because that's what it looks like. Anyway, Jairus came up. He comes up to him, and seeing Messiah, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. The word there for implored is basically he begged him. He fell down at his feet, begged him, right? Heard about Messiah, heard about healing ministry and the fact that they were bringing the sick to him and those that had all kinds of afflictions and ailments. This particular situation was dire. This was, according to Luke, this was his only daughter. His daughter is at the point of death. The Greek word there is eschatos. At the point of eschatos is where we get our word eschatology, which is the study of last days. So at the point of eschatos, at the end, actually, in the book of Matthew, it says that she had already died. Now, it might have been a situation where on his way she passed away. He was pursuing Yeshua, pursuing Jesus for her healing. Anyway, Matthew describes that. Anyway, at the point of death and perhaps dead, and he wanted Messiah to come and lay his hands on her so that she'll get well and live. This laying on of hands is in healing. The idea of healing is symbolic, basically of the transfer of vitality, one's vitality to one who needs it. So the laying on of hands has that picture of transferring life or vitality to one who needs it. So he wanted him to come, and it was common with Yeshua to do that. He would lay hands. That was a methodology. And Jesus went with him. He went with Jairus. And a large crowd was following him and pressing on him. So he's responded to Jairus and his need. And he's going to go off with him to go in and try and help. And he's got a crowd following him because he was teaching to the crowd, and he was, so he brought a crowd with him. Everywhere he went, there was a crowd following him, thronging him, pressing on him, it says in the word. And then we come to our second outline point, which is a desperate faith. Now, there was a woman in that crowd who had a hemorrhage, a bleeding for 12 years. I'm just going to read the whole text, and then I'm going to summarize it real quick. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years, from what I understand, it may have been something through the menstrual cycle, but it was a continual bleeding for 12 years, and she was in misery. It says here in verse 26 that she had endured much, and part of that endurance was at the hand of many physicians who tried to help, but apparently were not helping and made the situation worse. Sometimes doctors could do that. You go to a doctor and you don't get the satisfaction because, they end up making it a little bit worse. So you go to a different physician. But anyway, she had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and wasn't helped at all, but rather it had grown worse. So we have really a real desperate situation here. She suffered this for 12 years. 12 years enduring this. 12 years enduring whatever pain she had to endure with this. She spent all her means. She was broke. Her condition, for all that, was worsened. And not only that, because of this bleeding, I believe she also was an outcast because she was unclean. So nobody really wanted to kind of necessarily be around her because they would become unclean too, and they'd have to get purified from that. So not a very good condition, very desperate condition, for this woman. Now, after hearing about Yeshua and probably hearing that Jesus had done a lot of healings and miracles, after hearing about the Lord, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. This is a pretty bold move because he was, it could have meant that he became unclean, although the Lord, isn't concerned with that because he's the pure one. But anyway, she really was wanting to touch his talit, outer garment, and I should have already been prepared for this, but I'm going to ask the camera people to follow me down here real quick because I have a kind of an example. I wanted you to know what perhaps she wanted to touch. She wanted to touch his outer garment, whether it be the garment that was long or the talit, which is the garment that it goes around the shoulder. But from this garment there's fringes, there's tassels here. The tassels are tassels, and then there's blue thread through the tassels. So this is what Jews commonly did. They commonly wore these garments. And anyway, I just want to share with you real quick. The Jews today, even to this very day, wear an outer garment called a tallis or a talit. They were commanded at each corner of the talit to have a fringe, to put a fringe or a tassel of blue to remind them that they were God's people and to remind them of the laws, the laws of the land. So here Yeshua, likely garbed in this, she comes up to him and she just wants to touch his fret. She thought to herself, look, she says, if I just touch his garments, I'll get well. So she does this bold move. She goes, probably pushes her way through the crowd, goes and just touches the fringe. If I just touch his garment, didn't want to touch him personally, but just his garment, I will get well. Now, was it faith in him, or was it just faith in the fact that he might magically be able to heal her? Of course, I think the former. I think she just had true faith, that if he was doing these healings, he could heal her as well. And even if she just touched his garment, I will get well. Well, sure enough, it says in verse 29, a word that is common in the Gospel of Mark is immediately. Like immediately, Yeshua did this, immediately, this went to this went to this activity. Straightway, immediately, the flow of her blood, the fountain of her blood, was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. She was made whole. She sensed that, she felt that, and of course, her faith, her trust, her action came to fruition. She was healed. It was a miracle. Now, at this particular point, we have a discerning question. Notice how it says immediately again in verse 30. Immediately, straightway, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, the power to heal, turned around to the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments? Who touched me?" I don't think he said it in that way. I think he just said, "Who touched my garments?" I think he just was conveying. I know that there was someone who touched me because power came forth out of me to obviously do the healing. It's kind of a fascinating scene here, this picture here. He turns around and he asks the crowd. Now, of course, his disciples think he's a little crazy because there was a ton of people there. How do you know? And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" Okay, and he looked around, and he did. He spotted the woman who had done this. And Jesus knew who it was who touched him, because it was a touch of faith. It was a touch that had some real heart and some faith behind it. And we know that Messiah is omniscient, and he knows all things. And he knew who it was. He just knew that that power had gone forth from him. Mark brings out this aspect of his deity, his omniscience, knowing the hearts and thoughts of all men. Of course, he's the living word, and all things are open to the eyes of him. All things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we give account. That's a text in the book of Hebrews. So he looked around and he saw who it was. He saw the woman. He knew it was her. Now, in our fourth outline point, we see a daughter healed. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. I really love that line. You know, she knew that she was spotted. She knew that he had seen her and knew her. And of course, in her conscience, she realized that she had to just own up. She came forward and told him the whole truth. I love the term, the whole truth. In other words, honest. It's always good just to be always honest before God. And she shared probably the truth of her pain, the truth of her journey, the truth of her desperation, and of course the truth of her healing at this time. So she came and told him the whole truth. And again, I love that. I think the psalmist writes that the Lord desires truth from the innermost being. One thing, when you come to God in prayer, you're not going to be able to hide behind any kind of facade or multiple of words, because he knows your heart. You might as well come and be honest before the Lord. Lord, I blew it. Lord, I feel this way. Lord, I'm angry at this. Lord, this is where I'm at. He desires truth. He's not afraid to answer your questions. He's not afraid of what you're going to reveal to him, because he already knows it anyway. So you might as well be honest before the Lord. Thou desirest truth in the innermost being. Verse 34, and he said to her, and I love this term here, he says to her, daughter. In all the Gospels and all the accounts of Messiah, this is the only recorded time that he ever turned to someone or a woman and said, daughter. Okay, daughter. That just shows you the tenderness and the personalness of this. He says, your faith, your trust has made you well. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Go and be fully restored. And he assures her of a complete and permanent healing. And basically the idea, the concept here of ever thinking that it was the garment that healed, this dispels that, because he says your faith has made you whole. Not that you touched my garment, not that my garment has any power to it, but the power came from me because you had faith and trust in me. And I think about, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Robe, where supposedly this Roman guard had this robe because they drew lots for the robe, and this robe was supposed to be, well, magical or whatever, or they thought it had healing power, but it wasn't the robe, it was the one who wore it. That's where the power came from. Anyway, Jesus knew from the beginning who it was, but he wanted her to testify. He wanted her to share her testimony of what happened and what resulted from it. And he wanted God to be glorified through it, and he wanted people to know. So it was good for her to step forward in that way. So we had a daughter healed. But at the same time, you're wondering, well, where's Jairus at this time? Where's Jairus at this time? Well, there's a distressing report that comes in this delay, or during this delay. We pick it up in verse 35. While he's still speaking, they may have been the family and friends that were waiting at the house, waiting for Yeshua to come and show up. They came from the house of the synagogue official saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? Don't worry him. Why worry him? Why vex him? Why trouble or fatigue him anymore? She's gone. In other words, there's no hope. She's gone. You know, death seems to cancel all kind of hope of life. Of course, you're dealing with the Prince of Life here. So the picture here, I like the idea. Somebody said, so I read somewhere that, he just healed this daughter after 12 years. He healed this daughter. Can he heal another daughter at this time? So anyway, your daughter has died, and why trouble the teacher? And here's the directive that Messiah overhearing this conversation, overhearing it, what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, Don't be afraid any longer, only believe. Only believe. I took that phrase, only believe. That's a phrase that has been from generation to generation an anchor to the soul, okay, of many. Only believe. No magic words here. No, just only believe. They anchor the soul. They've anchored the soul of troubled, sick, heartbroken people from generation to generation. Telling people telling people, and sharing. Only believe. Just believe. Just trust. Just believe, no matter what the circumstances might be. They anchor the soul. No magic about it. Anyway, at this point, he allowed no one to accompany him. He sent the crowd back, except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. These were Yeshua's inner circle. They were serving as witnesses to whatever he did. And of course, they were able to put this and convey this. It was Peter that probably conveyed this whole scene to Mark. Mark wasn't there at this time. He just conveyed the words of Peter, which he knew and ministered, I believe, with. Anyway, they were with him as legal witnesses. They were also with him at the Transfiguration, the three of them, and they were also with him at Gethsemane. Peter, James, and John. So we come to the household. This smaller group comes and goes to the household of the official. You pick it up in verse 38. They came to the house of the synagogue official. He saw a commotion. When Yeshua came, he saw a commotion and people loudly weeping and wailing. Okay. This is what happens at Jewish rituals concerning mourning. You have mourners there, people that are hired mourners, and you have this commotion going on. You may have had minstrels there, flute players there playing dirges, funeral dirges. You have this commotion going on because a death has taken place. It's not a somber situation. There's a lot of activity going on. Not as quiet at these funerals as one might expect. There was mourners there, professional mourners there. And entering in, Yeshua enters in. He says to the people that were there causing the commotion, he says, "Why make a commotion and weep?" Not that he was criticizing the commotion and weep, because that's traditional Jewish weeping. But he's saying, why are you doing it at this point? Because he says the child has not died, but is asleep. Okay, and he gives this aspect. When people die, they look at. We were at a funeral just recently, just this week, and it looks like the individual is asleep. It just looks from this physical point of view that they're asleep. But in this particular case, since Messiah is going to raise her, from the dead, he just basically said the truth, that she's asleep. In other words, why are you here mourning? She's not dead. I know this. You don't know this now. But of course, they turned around and laughed at him. Look what the next text says. They began laughing at him scornfully. It just goes to show you how heartfelt they were about their mourning. But they started laughing at him because they knew she was dead. But he said, no, she's asleep. You see, Messiah's authority, he is the resurrection and the life. He is the resurrection and the life. And he tells them plainly that their presence was no longer needed because she was alive, or she was about to be alive, okay? So anyway, he puts them all out, he expels them, and he took the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered into the room where the child was. And then we pick it up, a powerful healing happening. Verse 41, taking the child by the hand, he said to her, Talitha kum. This is Aramaic. Aramaic is a Northwest Semitic language. Comes from a Syrian dialect. It's really modern day Aram. It came from Aram, which is Syria. That's where the word Aramaic came from. It was like the common language. Many say that it was Yeshua that spoke Aramaic. As a matter of fact, if you saw the movie, the recent movie of Yeshua, of Jesus, he was speaking Aramaic. The one that Mel Gibson did, I forget what it was called, the title of it. Anybody remember? Huh? The what? The Passion of the Messiah. Yeah, correct. That was all Aramaic to make it sound official, and there was titles there, subtitles, so we could understand it. But anyway, Talitha kum, which translates, really, little maid, arise. What a tender scene. Little maid, arise. And immediately, there's that favorite word again. Immediately, the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old, just showing that she wasn't confined to her sick bed and partially sick and partially healed. No, she got up. She was 12 years old. Please note that the woman with the blood issue had her issue for 12 years, so there's a 12-year situation. I don't know. Maybe that's a connection, maybe not, but anyway, it's fun to point it out. And immediately, there's that word immediately. Immediately, they, all the witnesses that were there, and mother and father, were completely astounded. Of course, this is, I think, his first resurrection at this point, first fruits of his resurrection, because he is the resurrection and the life. They were greatly amazed. The Greek there is ekstasis, from which we get the word what? Ekstasis. Yeah, ecstatic or ecstasy, ecstatic. Anyway, astounded. And he gave them strict orders, probably because he didn't want this miracle to attract people for the wrong reasons. He gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that something should be given to her to eat. I think that's a twofold purpose, just to show people that she wasn't a ghost. She was actually there in assuming her natural functions as one who was alive, signifying the restoration to natural life, still needing basic food, confirming that she was restored to good health. And that's a Jewish thing. I think my mom would always say if I was sick and I began to recover as being sick, if I was eating, it was a good sign. It means you were getting healthy. If you eat, you get a little healthy. So you always want to see somebody who's sick. Are you eating? Anyway. It's all sign of good health, sign that the healing process is on its way. All right, we're concluded with the text. That was a long text. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I want to share with you real quickly the key observations from this particular text. What does this teach us? What does this convey to us? And I've got a lump in my throat, so I'm going to take a real quick swig of this. I really hate dead air time, but sorry. Anyway, there are 4 key observations that we pull from this text. First of all, we see the pursuit of faith. Faith is pursued in this particular case. Really kind of pesky faith. Somebody that is continual. Because this is demonstrated by Jairus, who went ahead and sought out and met Yeshua. He pursued Jesus, believing that he could heal his daughter. So he pursued, met Messiah, believing that he could heal his daughter now at the point of death. He took steps of faith. He pursued Messiah. We see the same thing with the woman with the hemorrhage, who pushed through a throng of people just to touch, quote, in faith, Jesus' garments. She took steps of faith. She was dangerously there, an unclean woman, touching him. And of course, he called her, and I'm sure she was fearful and trembling, like it says. But even in her unclean condition, she went ahead and pursued the Lord. So we see the pursuit of faith. But then the second observation, which is the key, the main one here, is the priority of faith. This was proclaimed by Yeshua as the means by which the woman with the hemorrhage was healed by her faith. And he, Messiah, said to her, we read tonight, daughter, your faith, it's your faith that has made you well. Her belief and trust in what Yeshua had said, is what Yeshua honored. And he honored her trust in him, her faith in him. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. This was also prioritized by Yeshua in speaking to Jairus after he heard that his daughter had died. Having received this message, it's a sad message, Jesus hearing the people talking about no longer troubling the master because she's passed on, he goes ahead concerning this message that was given. He says to the synagogue official, Jairus, don't be afraid any longer, only believe, only have faith. Even when it seems hopeless, only have faith. Third observation is the pompous ridicule of the mourners who confronted Yeshua concerning their mourning. Yeshua confronted them. Why are you mourning? She's not past. She's not gone. Who laughed also at Yeshua's declaration that the child was sleeping. And the end result for them is they were cast out by Messiah right before his healing. I put this down because the scripture says there's always going to be mockers ridiculing your faith and your beliefs. There's always going to be mockers around, contradicting the word of God. It says in Peter that in the last days, mockers will arise. And I think Terry probably knows this text, claiming, where is the sign of his coming? Because we've known this from the beginning, but where is he? And there's a warning against just, mockers, don't let the mockers get you down, because there will always be mockers. There will always be those who ridicule. There's always going to be the pompous who think that they could just basically cast away the Lord or cast away God. But they're in for a rude awakening. Okay. Anyway. Fourth observation, the predominant power of Messiah, which is the whole section title here, who healed the woman immediately, powerfully, of her incurable hemorrhaging. And I wrote down something here. Notice how every time he immediately healed. I mean, there didn't have to be any kind of waiting, any kind of squirming or crying out or any. When Yeshua healed, it says he healed. I wrote this down. He healed with effortless authority. Immediately, it was gone. There wasn't any, okay, if you have enough faith, I'm going to heal you. There isn't any misunderstanding about the authority of this healing, because immediately they were healed. The power of his authority. Who also touched and raised Jairus' daughter immediately from death to life. Talitha kum, little maid, arise. I believe that this is, again, as we summarize this subsection, we see this predominant power of Yeshua. Power over nature, stilling of the storm, power over demons, the casting of legion out, power over sickness, and power over death. The final thing to conquer is Messiah's predominant power of Jesus the Messiah. This is divine power, the power of God here, because nobody could do these things unless God is with them. I'm going to stop right here and share some personal thoughts, okay, and before I conclude the text with some proof texts about faith. I'd like to share a perspective as a Jew to other Jews that may be listening, and of course, everybody's welcome to hear. Tonight's text was focused on the lives of two Jewish people. These folks, Jairus was Jewish. He was a synagogue leader or a controller of the synagogue, and she was a Jewish woman. It's the lives of two Jews here. Both were in a desperate situation. One had a daughter on her deathbed, the other terribly sick with incurable hemorrhaging. Now, being Jews, they both believed in the one true God. Especially we know the one who took care of the synagogue. I mean, they were believers in the one true God. They believed in Yahweh. They believed in the Lord God, the God of Israel, the God of the Jews. But both had faith and were marvelously healed. And the object of their faith was Jesus, though. It was Jesus. He was the object of their faith. They had faith in him. He was a great teacher who had manifested to them the power of God among them, and they believed him. It's important for people to have faith, but you have to have the right object of your faith. A lot of people have faith. A lot of people are religious. They have faith. They believe this. They believe that. They believe in this God here or that God. But you have to have the right object of your faith, that you may be healed, that you may be able, that you may receive the deliverance or salvation. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, I have a question for any who are Jewish that may be listening. Did their faith in Jesus nullify their belief in the one true God? Did it nullify their belief, the God of Israel? Did that mean they all of a sudden just didn't believe in the God of Israel? No, I'm sure they still believed in the God of Israel, but they believed in him too. They put their faith in him. And of course, that's difficult for Jewish people to do, is to turn around and, okay, you're asking me to believe in someone who's not God. Well, What if someone was sent by God and was a manifestation of God and God's power? And it's obvious by what he did. Did their faith in Yeshua nullify their belief in the one true God? Or did their faith express a belief that God had sent Jesus and that God was manifesting his presence and power in and through him? And that was the case here. Their faith in Yeshua didn't disqualify them as Jews, or didn't disqualify their faith in God at all. The book of Acts, we read, the writer of the book of Acts says that Yeshua was a man attested to them, the Jewish people, by God. He was proven by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in their midst. In other words, he was from God. He was sent of God. Nicodemus, the great Nicodemus said to him, the Pharisee, great Pharisee said, "We know that you come from God. Nobody could do the things that you do except God be with him." So did that nullify their faith in God? Did that nullify their belief in the God of Israel? No, it just added something that God had done that they embraced and believed in. In other words, the sending of the Messiah, the sending of the Lord, the sending of the eternal Son. Yeshua says in John, before he was ascended, he said, "Don't let your heart be troubled." And I would say this to the Jewish community, "Don't let your heart be troubled," Messiah says to them. "You believe in God, believe also in me." And he also said a few verses down, he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." This is my mission. I am the way, the truth, and the life, the way to receive life. No man comes to the Father but through me. This is his mission. He was sent as a mediator. He was sent as the great high priest, the Kohen Gadol, that is the mediator of the Jews and Gentiles, to bring us to God, to lead us to God, and lead us to a relationship with God. So did their faith express a belief that God had sent Jesus? That was their belief. Did their faith in Yeshua disqualify them as Jews? That's my secondary question. By believing in Jesus, did it nullify their belief in the one true God? No. It was an additional belief that he was sent of God and was attested to by God and was performing a mission of God and is the means by which we receive our salvation in God or through God. Anyway, it just dawned on me that these two were Jews and they had no problem embracing Yeshua. And they had no problem as Jews because it didn't nullify their belief in the one true God. That's one of the most difficult things to convey to a Jew, a Jewish person, regarding Yeshua. That we're not straying from the one true and living God. We chant the Shema. We believe the Shema. We believe that hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We believe that God is one, but he has a son. He manifested a son distinctly, of the same nature and essence. I mean, I can go into my beliefs on the triunity, but I think you get the picture here, and I can't do that because that's another whole topic. All righty, let's go ahead and conclude. Let's look at our personal application. I thought for personal application, we'd reflect on the main theme of this, which is the key theme that emerges, which is the priority of faith. And I wanted to share with you some the biblical priority of faith. And I could have gotten tons of passages, but these are the ones that affect me when I think about faith. First of all, it's by faith that we receive salvation. Of course, faith in Messiah, that we receive forgiveness of our transgressions and sins because he paid for our sins. We place our faith in the atoning work of Messiah. It says, Paul writes to the Ephesian believers, he says, "By grace, by his favor, you've been saved." How? Through faith in Messiah specifically. And that not of yourselves, it's the gift of God, not as a result of your endeavors or your merit, so that no one can boast. It's by faith. We're saved by faith. Another secondary verse, as Paul talks to the Roman believers, "I'm not ashamed of the gospel," Paul writes, "the good news of Yeshua, for it's the power of God for salvation, for deliverance from the condemnation of sin and death." That's what we need to be saved from. Everybody born into this world is condemned by sin and death. You're going to die. Why? Because you had that condemnation because what Adam did. And in Adam, all die. In Messiah, all are made alive. And he says, this is the power of God for deliverance from that curse that we had from the beginning. To everyone who believes, to the Jew first, because it was given to them. Salvation is of the Jew first, but then the Gentiles, of course, as well. Anyway, for in this gospel message, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. The righteousness means that you receive a righteous standing before God because of your faith. And this is the way it's been done from generation to generation, from faith to faith. Has always been that which it's by the faith, whoever it is, it's by faith in God in any generation that saves him before God. In it, the righteousness of God is revealed, as it is written in the book of Habakkuk, but the righteous man shall live by faith. So it's by faith that we receive salvation. It's by faith also that we please God. One of my favorite verses in Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is. I love that. Must believe that he first is, that God exists. He is, and that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. One particular text says, diligently seek him. We seek after him by faith. Our Creator, we must believe that our Creator exists and he's the source of all things. Without faith, without belief in that, it's impossible to please him. Faith is what pleases God. Trust in him is what pleases him. I love this text also. This is the example of faith. It's by faith that the great Abraham received a righteous standing before God. And his situation was pretty miserable as well to a certain degree. I mean, he walked with the Lord. But he was promised by God that out of him would come nations, would come a seed, would have the seed that would bless all nations. Messiah would come forth from him. He's 100 years old. He's a prune. He's not doing anything good. He's got nothing. His body is as good as dead. We're going to read about it. And of course, Sarah's womb was dead too. Everything was dead. How's he going to have this generation, this nations come forth from him? Well, it's the promise of God. But notice that his faith. He still retained faith. In hope against hope, we read. In other words, even when it was hopeless, he believed, that God would make of him a great nation so that he might become the father of many nations according to that which had been spoken, which promises to him. Without becoming weak in faith, Abraham, he contemplated his own body. I do that every morning. Son of man, can these bones live? I do that. I contemplate my own body. Now as good as dead, since he was about 100 years old, past child-producing years. And of course, the deadness of Sarah's womb, 90 years old and still no child. Yet with respect to the promise of God, he didn't waver in unbelief. But listen to this, he grew strong in faith. That's real faith. 25 years waiting for this child. Faith. In hope against hope. It was hopeless. Giving glory to God. And being fully assured that what God had promised, he was able to perform. Therefore, in the scriptures, I believe it was in Romans chapter 4, but I believe we also see this in Genesis. It was a quote of scripture from Genesis. That faith was credited or given to him. That faith was credited to him as righteousness. In other words, he was declared righteous because of his trust in God, regardless of the circumstances. From Abraham came many nations. His promise would be fulfilled. For the children of Israel, the Jews are still around, are here, and they came from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That miracle, and they're, as throughout the years, they've been as the sand of the seas and the stars of the sky. And of course, Abraham has a lot of spiritual children too. All those that believe in the seed that came forth from Abraham, Messiah, are also sons of Abraham by faith. Not according to the flesh, but by faith. So he's got a multitude continual multitude of seed of ancestry. Not ancestry, got a seed of progeny. Okay. And my wife was going to talk to me about that wrong use of the word like she usually does. All right. It's not your ancestors. It's your people that you give birth to. All right. Ancestors looking back. Anyway. Rabbi Paul commended the churches for their faith. Of course, Paul says to the Thessalonian believers, he says, we give thanks always for all of you, making mention of you in our prayers, constantly bearing in mind your work of faith. your labor of love and your steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus the Messiah in the presence of God our Father, of our God and Father. The measure of a spiritual maturing church, one of those measures, and faith is measurable because faith is manifested in works, and heartfelt works as well. He says, work of faith, faith is measurable. And he commends the churches for their faith, hope, and love, and it's manifested. So faith is important in a body of believers. When you go to a congregation, what you want to see, a measure of maturity, you want to see if there's faith there, you want to see if the people convey a hope, and you want to see if there's love there, okay? Because those are the big three, faith, hope, and love. It's measurable. Finally, this is, again, another one of my, I'm sharing with you favorite passages. I could have shared a lot on faith. But I love this particular text in Peter, 1 Peter 1, 6, and 7. Faith is continually tested and undergoes a process of growth. Just something to know about with regard to faith. And Peter says, in this, your salvation, you're rejoicing. You're rejoicing in your salvation, even though, greatly rejoice, as a matter of fact, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you've been distressed by various trials. Can anybody relate to that? Even though, you rejoice in your salvation, but man, times are tough here. You're distressed by various trials. God knows all about it. He says, here's one of the reasons for it. Sometimes we face trials because of our own sins, but oftentimes, and you might be strong in faith, but you're still going through difficult times. This is so that the proof of your faith, the proof being the testing or demonstration of your faith, which is more precious than gold that perishes, even though tested by fire. Our faith is like gold purified by fire. It still takes the fire to purify, gold. But the fire is what we go through. Our faith is fired or purified through fire, fiery trials at times. Even though tested by fire, our faith may be found, and here's the end result, in praise and honor and glory at the revelation of Jesus the Messiah. There will be an eternal weight of glory, regardless of what you go through and what you're dealing with. Your faith is going to be manifest, and if it's been really faith in the face of all the adversity, if you continue in faith, those who have been faithful in times of suffering and adversity, those who have fought the good fight of faith, they're going to be found to praise and honor and glory at the revelation of Messiah when he returns. So, if you're dealing with, if you're having a struggle with faith and your faith is being tested, just know that there's a purpose and a reason behind it. Because without faith, it's impossible to please him. So he tests our faith. It's like testing our love. Anyway, those are just a few smattering of verses, and I hope that they encourage you. Reflecting on the priority of faith, which I believe was the text tonight, the manifestation of the faith of these that were healed, and of course, the power that was involved.